The year was 1066, and England stood at the edge of destiny. For more than 2 decades, King Edward, known to his people as Edward the Confessor, had worn the crown of England. He was a pious king, mild in temperament, and more at home in the silence of prayer than in the clash of steel. He left behind no children, no direct heir of his blood. And so, when death came for him in the cold days of January, the realm of England trembled with uncertainty. Edward's death was no ordinary passing. It was the closing of an age. As he lay in his bed at Westminster, candlelight flickering upon stone walls, lords and courtiers whispered of omens. Some said a comet had burned across the winter sky. Others claimed to have seen shadows of mailed riders upon the clouds, as if war itself was mounting in the heavens. For in England, power had always been a fragile crown, and now it lay upon the ground, waiting for the boldest hand to seize it. 3 men, each with fire in his heart, reached for that crown. The first was Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, the most powerful noble in all England. Harold was a man of commanding presence, tall, broad-shouldered, and fierce in battle. He was brother-in-law to Edward, and though not of royal blood, he was the people's champion. He had led armies, secured peace, and guarded the coasts from raiders. When Edward breathed his last, the Witan, the Council of England's nobles, wasted no time. On the very next day, Harold was crowned king in Westminster Abbey. Yet crowns forged in haste are crowns forged in peril. Far across the narrow sea in Normandy, a man heard the news and burned with fury. This was William, Duke of Normandy, known to friend and foe as William the Bastard, for he had been born of an unmarried union. But William was no weakling marked by shame. He was a warrior duke who had carved his duchy from stone and blood. He claimed that Edward had once promised him the throne of England. More than that. William swore that Harold himself had traveled to Normandy and pledged an oath upon holy relics to support his claim. To William, Harold was not only a usurper, but a traitor, and William vowed that the English crown would be his, or England itself would burn. But even William was not the only wolf circling the crown. To the north, across the sea in Norway, the mighty Harald Hardrada raised his eyes toward England. He was no ordinary king. He was a Viking of the old blood, tall as a giant, hardened by a lifetime of war. His name meant hard ruler, and his deeds filled sagas sung by skalds across the north. Harold claimed the crown through ancient treaties and forgotten promises, but in truth, he needed no parchment. His claim was the edge of his axe, his strength, and the thunder of his longships. 3 men, 3 claims, 1 throne, and thus the stage was set for a year that would change England forever. When Harold Godwinson placed the crown upon his head, the bells of London rang, but not all hearts rejoiced. Some whispered that Harold's rise was too sudden, too convenient. Others warned that William would not let this insult stand. Harold himself, though proud, was not blind. He knew that the crown upon his head was also a target upon his life. His spies brought word from Normandy. Ships were being built, knights were being gathered, priests were blessing banners. William was coming, and yet, before Harold could even prepare for Normandy's wrath, fate struck from another quarter. Word arrived that Harald Hardrada of Norway had landed in the north, bringing with him a storm of steel. With him was Tostig, Harold's own brother, cast out of England years before, now returning as traitor at the side of a Viking king. It was a cruel twist of fate. Harold, barely crowned, was forced to march his army north to meet the Viking threat. In these days, England was a land of superstition, where the heavens themselves were thought to speak to mortals. And indeed, the skies blazed with fire. In April, a comet, long, bright, and terrible, scorched the night sky for 7 days. Men looked upon it and muttered of doom. Chroniclers later wrote that it was Halley's comet, but to the people of 1066, it was the fiery sword of God, cutting across the heavens to herald the slaughter to come. Old men recalled prophecies that England would fall to a foreign ruler. Priests warned of penance and sin, yet in the taverns and the halls of thanes, men tightened their belts and sharpened their swords. For omens or not, war was coming. For now, Harold Godwinson wore the crown. He was king, but not yet secure. He strengthened his armies, called upon his lords, and prepared for the defense of his realm. Yet England was a broad land, and its new king could not be everywhere at once. Every day, rumors came. Ships gathering in Normandy, sails rising in Norway. The year had only begun, and already it smelled of blood. In the Chronicles of Monks, the story of 1066 would be told as the hand of God moving upon nations, but to the men who lived it, it was fear, hunger, loyalty, and steel. It was the clash of ambitions, the rise of giants, and the fall of kings. The throne of England was a prize too rich to rest in peace, and soon it would be drenched in war. On the cold morning of January 6, 1066, as snowflakes fell upon London, Harold Godwinson was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The golden crown of Edward the Confessor rested heavy upon his brow, and the voices of priests filled the air with solemn chants. To the English nobles, Harold was the rightful choice, a strong lord, defender of the realm, a man who had fought for his people. But across the seas, and even within his own kingdom, shadows gathered. For Harold's rise to the throne was not uncontested. 3 men, each with blood, ambition, and destiny on their side, had sworn that crown belonged to them. From the frozen lands of Norway, a storm gathered. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, set his eyes upon England. To him, the English throne was promised through ancient treaties, forged in blood long before Harold Godwinson was born. Harald Hardrada was no ordinary king. He had carved his name across half the world, from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the golden palaces of Byzantium. Tall, broad, clad in shining steel, his very presence was said to terrify lesser men. With him rode battle-hardened warriors, their axes sharp and their shields painted with dragons and ravens. They did not come to negotiate. They came for conquest. Meanwhile, across the Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, sharpened his blades and plotted in silence. To him, Harold Godwinson was not just a rival, but a traitor. Years before, Harold had sworn a sacred oath to support William's claim to the English crown. That oath had been made with hands placed upon holy relics, and now Harold had broken it. In the mind of William, there was no greater sin. Betrayal of a solemn oath meant Harold was unworthy of kingship. The Duke of Normandy would cross the seas, he vowed, and tear the crown from Harold's head. In the late summer of 1066, Harold Hardrada struck first. With a fleet of 300 longships, his Viking warriors swept across the North Sea, their sails billowing like black wings. They landed upon the coast of England, joined by Harold's own treacherous brother, Tostig, who longed for revenge against his kin. The north of England trembled. Villages burned, fields blackened, and English blood spilled into the soil. The Viking thunder had returned, and it roared with merciless fury. Word of the invasion reached Harold Godwinson swiftly, but the crown was new upon his head, and already he was tested. Without hesitation, Harold summoned his men and marched north. From London to Yorkshire, his army traveled, across hills, rivers, and weary roads. They marched with shields upon their backs, spears in hand, and determination in their eyes. It was a brutal journey. Yet Harold knew delay meant disaster. If the Vikings claimed York, they would open the gates of England to endless raids. Harold had no choice but to move swiftly and strike. On September 25, 1066, the 2 armies met near the village of Stamford Bridge. It was a warm day, unseasonably bright, and the sun glistened upon helmets and swords. Harold Hardrada's men laughed when they saw Harold's army approach, for they had left much of their armor behind, expecting only to collect tribute from a surrendering England. But Harold Godwinson had come not to yield, but to fight. The battle began with fury. Arrows darkened the skies, axes cleaved shields, and the sound of steel rang across the fields. At the narrow bridge itself, a lone Viking berserker stood defiant, his axe felling any Englishman who dared cross. He held the bridge until dozens lay at his feet, until at last a spear thrust from beneath the planks struck him down. The battle raged 4 hours. Hardrada fought like the warrior he had always been, his great sword swinging, his voice roaring above the clash. But destiny caught him in the throat. An English arrow pierced him, and the great Viking king fell upon the field. his lifeblood staining the soil of England. Without their king, the Norsemen broke. The longships that had brought them numbered 300 when they came. Only 24 carried survivors home. The age of the Viking raids upon England had ended, broken at Stamford Bridge. Yet Harold's triumph was no triumph at all. His men were battered, weary, and wounded from the march and the slaughter. They had fought with courage and won, but they had little strength left to give. And even as they buried their dead, far to the south, sails were rising upon the horizon, for William of Normandy had crossed the Channel. The true test, the test that would decide the fate of England forever, had only just begun. The winds ruled the fate of kings. For weeks, William of Normandy waited on the northern coast of France, his fleet of ships restless as the tides. His men sharpened their swords, repaired their shields, and prayed to the saints. But the sea gave no mercy. The English Channel, that narrow strip of water, stood as the barrier between ambition and destiny. When the winds finally shifted, it was as though the heavens themselves had chosen a side. William ordered the sails raised, and a fleet unlike any England had ever seen set forth across the waters. By moonlight, the ships cut through the dark waves, carrying knights clad in iron, archers with their yew-bows, and horses that would trample the fields of Hastings into history. They landed upon the shores of Pevensey. The Norman banner, golden lions on red, was planted in English soil. William wasted no time. His men built fortifications, a wooden castle rising almost overnight. This was not a raid. This was an invasion and empire's birth. Far to the north, King Harold Godwinson was celebrating a victory that would echo for centuries. At Stamford Bridge, he had shattered the Viking host of Harold Hardrada, the thunder of Norsemen, silenced by English steel. But victory came at a price. Harold's army was weary, bloodied, and stretched thin. Then the message came William had landed. Without rest, Harold marched his men south, covering hundreds of miles in mere days. The roads were lined with fallen soldiers too weak to keep pace, their bodies a silent testament to Harold's desperate gamble. Yet the king pressed on, for the fate of England hung in the balance. By early October, the two forces faced one another near the town of Hastings. On one hill stood Harold and his shield, while a wall of men bound by loyalty and stubborn courage, axes and spears bristling like a forest of iron. These were not knights in shining armor, but farmers, thanes, and huscarls hardened by battle. They would not yield an inch. On the other side, William's army glittered with the power of continental Europe. Cavalrymen clad in mail rode horses bred for war, while archers prepared to darken the sky with arrows. William's men were trained, disciplined, and hungry for conquest. 2 kings, 2 destinies, 1 battlefield. The morning mist of October 14th would soon bear witness to a clash that would shape the fate of England for all time. The dawn of October 14th, 1066, broke cold and gray. Mist clung to the hills as both armies stirred, the earth trembling beneath the march of thousands of men. The clash that would decide England's destiny was moments away. On the high ground at Senlac Hill, Harold Godwinson formed his line. His hussars elite, warriors wielding great axe, scud at the core, their iron helmets gleaming, their shields locked tight. Around them, the furred, ordinary Englishmen, summoned from villages and towns, clutched spears and simple weapons, their hearts pounding with fear and fury. Together, they formed the legendary shield wall, an unbroken rampart of wood, steel, and flesh. Behind it, Harold himself stood, crowned yet battle-ready, swearing that no Norman foot would breach their line. Across the field, William's army unfurled like a storm. First came the archers, bows bending under the strain of the yew. Behind them, armored infantry with swords and spears marched in unison. And behind them, the thunder of cavalry Norman knights mounted upon war, their lances glittering in the morning sun. William, the Duke of Normandy, rode among them with calm authority, his presence steady in the hearts of his men. His voice cut through the wind. Fight bravely, for today we claim not just land, but a crown. The battle began with a hiss. Norman arrows arced into the sky and rained upon the English. Yet the shield wall held firm, shields raised, heads bowed, the rain of death deflected by oaken iron. Few fell. The English jeered, their defiance echoing across the field. William ordered the infantry forward. The ground shook as Norman foot soldiers clashed against the shield wall. Spears jabbed, axes swung, and the screams of dying men rose into the air. But still, the wall did not break. Like a cliff, battered by waves, the English line stood immovable. Then came the sound that shook the earth. The Norman cavalry. War horses thundered across the field, lances lowered, riders shouting their battle cries. They smashed into the shield wall with terrifying force. But the English stood their ground. Horses, rearrayed knights, toppled, and the wall of shields absorbed the blow. English axes rose and fell, cleaving into flesh and steel alike. One knight was dragged from his horse, his armor ripped away as the English drove their spears through his chest. Time and again, the cavalry charged, and time and again, the shield wall repelled them. Then, amidst the chaos, a cry spread across the Norman lines. William is dead. Panic rippled through the ranks. Men faltered. Some fled, the army threatening to collapse in fear. But William, fierce and unbroken, tore off his helmet and rode before his men, his face revealed. His voice roared like thunder. I live, and with God's will, I will conquer. The Normans steadied. The battle raged on. At last, William turned cunning to his advantage. He ordered a false retreat. Norman cavalry wheeled back, pretending to flee. The English, believing victory near, broke discipline. Some left the safety of the shield wall to chase their enemies down the hill. And then, like a trap sprung, the Normans turned. The cavalry wheeled around, crashing into the no-exposed English. The hunters became the hunted, slaughtered upon the slopes. The shield wall, once unbreakable, now began to crack. The tide of battle had shifted. The sun was sinking lower, its pale light casting long shadows across the blood-soaked field of Sinlac Hill. The ground itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of the fallen. Yet still, the battle raged, more furious than ever. 4 hours, Harold's men had stood firm, their shields battered, their bodies weary. But with each feigned retreat and sudden counterattack, the Normans had chipped away at their discipline. Gaps opened, lines bent. The once mighty shield wall was no longer a wall, but a jagged, bleeding fragment of what it had been. Still, Harold fought on, towering above his men, wielding his great axe. He struck down night after night, refusing to yield an inch of ground. His presence alone kept the English from collapsing entirely. And then came the moment, etched forever in legend. A Norman archer standing among the ranks below drew his bow. He loosed an arrow high into the fading sky. It arced above the chaos, above the clash of steel and the cries of men, before falling into the English line. The shaft struck Harold. Some say it pierced his eye. Others claim he was struck in the chest. Whatever the truth, the effect was the Semingland's king staggered, his hand rising instinctively toward the wound, his crown slipping upon his head. The cry went up across the battlefield. The king is struck. The king is dying. Norman knights, seizing the moment, surged forward. They cut their way to Harold's side, surrounding the wounded king. His huscarls, loyal to the last, fought desperately to protect him. Blades clashed, shields splintered, men screamed and fell. But one by one, Harold's defenders were cut down. The last of the shield wall dissolved into chaos, and in the midst of it, Harold Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, fell beneath Norman steel. His blood mingled with the earth of Sinlac Hill, the crown of England lost with his final breath. With their king dead, the English spirit broke. Some fled into the woods, their weapons abandoned, their cries lost to the night. Others were cut down as they tried to escape. The battlefield, once a place of defiance, became a graveyard. The Normans stood victorious. William, bloodied, yet unbowed, gazed upon the carnage. The crown he had long sought was within reach, but it was bought with rivers of blood. The road to London now lay open. In the weeks that followed, William advanced steadily, crushing resistance, seizing cities, and burning villages that dared defy him. By Christmas Day of 1066, he was crowned William the Conqueror in Westminster Abbey, the new King of England. The old world of the Anglo-Saxons was gone. A new order had begun, one that would reshape England forever. The battlefield of Hastings was silent now, where hours before thousands had shouted, clashed, and died. Only crows and smoke remained. Yet the echoes of that day in 1066 would carry far beyond the hills of Sussex. In the weeks that followed, William pressed his advantage. He marched toward London, burning villages and terrifying the people into submission. Resistance crumbled. On Christmas Day, in the grand halls of Westminster Abbey, William was crowned King of England. But his crown was no gift. It was won through steel and blood, and it would take years of fire and force to truly secure it. Rebellions rose again and again, and William crushed them with ruthless efficiency. Castles sprang up across the limestone fortresses of Norman power looming over a conquered people. With Harold's fall, the Anglo-Saxon nobility was shattered. Lands were seized and granted to Norman lords. A new ruling class emerged, speaking French, writing in Latin, and imposing their own laws. The old ways of England faded, replaced by a new order born of conquest. The English language itself changed forever, absorbing Norman words until the tongue of peasants and kings became the early root of the English we speak today. For William, Hastings was not merely a victory. It was the foundation of his legacy. From a duke with acclaim, he became William the Conqueror, the first Norman king of England. His rule bound England to the wider world of Europe, shaping its destiny for centuries to come. The Doomsday Book, his great survey, recorded every field, every village, every plough, as if to say, "This land is mine, and mine forever." The Battle of Hastings was more than a clash of swords and shields. It was a turning point in world history. It decided who would rule England. It changed the culture, the language, the very identity of a nation, and it showed that on a single day, in a single battle, the fate of kingdoms can be read. Nearly 1,000 years have passed since Harold fell and William rose, yet the memory of Hastings endures. Monuments stand, chronicles tell, and the very soil of England still remembers. For in 1066, on the slopes of Sinlac Hill, an arrow loosed from a Norman bow carried more than death. It carried the weight of destiny. And from that day forward, England would never be the same.